Significant sudden changes in global temperature could lead to rougher and more frequent air pockets above the world's jet stream winds, creating worse and more frequent turbulence. The above statement is triggering, panic-inducing even. If you're like me who doesn't like flying but has no other way to get across the Atlantic to visit my country of birth, or would prefer to get from one state to another in 2 hours rather than 2 days, not to mention all the plane crashes and near misses that have occurred since the year began, and they are way too numerous for comfort. But if I want to internalize all of these things, I will never fly again, and that's just not the way to live. Not for me anyway. Luckily, there are ways to cope with long flights and even make them enjoyable in economy, despite everything going on. I'll have those tips and more coming right up, so if this is something that interests you, keep on watching. What's up, beautiful people, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Yaira, better known as simply Yaya. I am proudly African from Cameroon, born and bred. I worked for Disney for the better half of my young adult life, and more recently, Whole Foods. I'm always working on leveling and glowing up, and I have a Master of Science in Journalism, which informs how I view and discuss some aspects of pop culture on this channel. And for early access to all of my upcoming videos, which you'll get to see 48 hours before everyone else, you can join my membership here on YouTube at $4.99 a month, or my Patreon at $10 a month. You also get bonus content and other perks like me going live once a week. In this video, I'll be dishing out some tips on how to cope and make long flights more comfortable and, dare I say, enjoyable. You are probably thinking all of what I said prior in my introduction has nothing to do with this topic. Oh, but it does. You see, I've spent the better half of my 20s into my 30s crisscrossing the US and the globe, so I know a thing or two about long flights and short flights too. I traveled to Ghana recently in late 2023, and the year prior I traveled to Cameroon. And I had a series going which I've since combined into one neat package in this video. This video you're currently watching about ways to make long flights more enjoyable was supposed to have been part of that series, but I just never got around to writing the script. Well, today is the day.
Today's the day.
By the way, I got a review of that movie coming soon. My number one tip to make your long flight more enjoyable, and it's number one because it could mean the difference between life and death, is wearing compression socks before you get on that flight, especially if you've had surgery recently or are older. I am no medical expert, however, sitting for that long and especially at that altitude is sure to affect the circulation in your legs. Hailey Bieber has gone on record to say that one of the possible reasons she could have suffered a blood clot to her brain 3 years ago was the recent long flight she had taken to Paris, in which she never got up to move around because she slept the entire flight and wasn't wearing compression socks.
They did come to the conclusion of why they think I had a blood clot in the first place. And the conclusion that all of the doctors came to was 3 different things. One was that I had just recently started birth control pills. The second thing was I had recently had COVID. Third thing was that I had recently gone on a really long flight. I had flown to Paris and back in a very short amount of time. And I slept through the whole flight both ways, didn't get up and move around, never thought about wearing compression socks. So basically, all of the doctors came to the conclusion that it was a perfect storm that led to me having a small blood clot, and that was the conclusion.
I personally haven't worn compression socks when traveling, but I do get up to walk around every 2 hours, even if I don't have to use the restroom. This is all, of course, when the seatbelt signs are off and we are allowed to move around. My mom never fails to wear hers, obviously because of her age. So if you don't have compression socks, I would advise investing in a pair or just setting your alarm for every 2 to 3 hours depending on how long the flight is. That way you don't forget to get up and move around and stretch. This is the perfect segue into my second tip for making your flight more comfortable. Get up and move around. That one is pretty self-explanatory. And you might think getting up and moving around is an inconvenience. Again, this could mean a difference between life and death. And again, I am not anyone's doctor, but you gotta keep that circulation going. Tip number 3, keep your essentials nearby. Your phone charger, passport, money, wallet, medication. Keep those in your handbag or backpack. You know, the bag you are allowed to carry on your lap or stow under the seat in front of you. That way you don't have to keep getting up and opening the overhead bin to access those items in your carry-on. Whatever you do, just don't put those items in your checked luggage, which goes under the plane. This might seem like common sense, but common sense ain't common. You'd be surprised how many people do that. And God forbid your luggage gets lost. Then you'll be looking and sounding like some of the guests I used to deal with at Disney. I worked for Disney as mentioned in my intro, and my most recent role before I quit back in 2021 was Resort Bell Services Dispatcher. The basic explanation of my job description is I dealt with luggage. I have at least 2 videos in which I detail my job description. I'll link those below if you're interested. But we had this courtesy service which allowed for guests to leave their checked bags at the airport, and Disney handled bringing those luggages to the resort. It wasn't my job per se to bring those from the airport. A third party handled that. It was called Disney Magical Express, which has since been dismantled after the pandemic, and for good reason. It was becoming a liability. Also, brief disclaimer, these are all my opinions based on my experience working for Disney. I am not a spokesperson for them. Anyway, it was part of my job, however, to deal with the aftermath of the arrival of the luggages at my resort. I had to scan the luggage tags and have the bags sent to the appropriate rooms. Before that could happen, though, it took about 5 hours, give or take, for those bags to get from the airport to the resorts. Because it's different airlines, different resorts, the bags needed to be sorted according to resort before being sent off. All of that paused once thunderstorms rolled through because the lightning was a hazard, obviously, and because bags getting wet was the last thing we wanted. See what I mean by liability? Having to replace people's luggage and the items in them if they got completely soaked. Now, some guests would get to the resort from the airport asking for their bags already, and it hadn't even been 2 hours. And then some of them would panic and say they have asthma, allergies, or diabetes, and your inhaler or EpiPen or insulin was in those luggages. I'm not quite sure why anyone would put something as essential as EpiPen so far away. Tip number 4, dress comfortably and warmly. Again, you might think this is common sense, and yet, just because you're flying to a hot location or it's summertime when you're flying doesn't mean anything. It gets cold on the plane at that altitude, so if you're not dressed warmly, at least have a blanket or something. Otherwise, a long flight will feel that much longer. International flights will provide blankets and small pillows. We've traditionally flown Delta internationally, and they provide blankets and pillows. Small ones, and those were fine for me. However, you could always bring yours. Tip number 5. This might be a bit controversial, but for me, I try to avoid drinking and eating too much before a flight because that means less trips to the bathroom. Already, the altitude messes with me, and so I try to curtail that by not eating too much. Obviously, I'll still get up and move around, but I won't have to be fighting for my life to use the restroom. Also, bathrooms on the plane are weird, so I try to avoid them if I can help it, or limit the amount of times I use them. Besides, we get fed on international flights, so no need to eat that much before a flight. I usually don't even have an appetite before flying because I'm so nervous. For my most recent international trip, the flight was about 9 hours. We got dinner 2 hours into the flight. Then we got breakfast about 3 hours prior to landing, and then again an hour before landing we got a snack. Funny story to illustrate my point. I was flying from Philly International to Chicago Midway, 2-hour flight. I made the mistake of drinking a whole can of Arizona iced tea before getting on the plane. Well then, there was turbulence for a majority of the flight, which meant the seatbelt sign was on and we were not allowed to get up from our seats. I mean, you could get up at your own risk. Well, as soon as the seatbelt sign went off, which means we were okay to get up, everybody had to use the bathroom. When I finally got to go, I was in such a hurry that I forgot to lock the door while in the bathroom. And then, of course, somebody opened the door on me while I was doing my business. So don't be like that if you can help it. Tip number 6, noise canceling headphones / chewing gum. The gum helps with my ears popping, and the headphones are to cancel out screaming children and the hum of the engine, which can be quite loud, especially if you're in the back of the plane. 7th and final tip, bring entertainment. Now with Delta, they have screens on the back of the headrests, and those are loaded with movies and music galore. But if you find yourself tired of listening to music, or you can't find anything you want to watch, you can read if you brought books or your Kindle. And that's all I have for you guys. There are obviously more tips, but these are the most important ones to me. I hope you enjoyed this video. Drop this emoji in the comments section if you made it this far, and watch this related video next. Bye!